Hello, and welcome to the Sunday service for the Unitarian Universalist Church of Pensacola. Our mission is to celebrate diversity, strive for justice, and inspire love. Our congregation typically reflects the area along the Florida Panhandle and the Alabama Gulf Coast. However, in today's world, we are delighted to be able to welcome you from anywhere. I am Reverend Alice Syltie. It's my privilege and honor to serve this congregation as minister. If you would like to know more about us, please feel free to reach out. I would be happy to talk with you. Welcome. When we accept the non-utilitarian goodness of life, a world that doesn't need a why, we tune into the raw delight of the world. Beauty decenters our ego by helping us realize that life is its own justification. As we let go of how everything relates to us, serves us, benefits us, we begin to appreciate all things for their own worth and beauty, and our desire for their flourishing intensifies. When we turn this idea onto our own selves, we can let go of the expectations of others and the societal standards of beauty in regard to our own worth.
For the beauty of the earth, for the splendor of the skies, for the love which from our birth over and around us lies. Source of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise.
What is it about this flame that opens our ears, opens our hearts? Come back to your center, it calls. Return to that quiet space we long for and that longs for us. From this stillness always a voice arises if we let it. So come, friends, let us listen once again. Let us find the flame inside that guides us back home. Our opening words come to us today from the Soul Matters team. the whisper of our souls. Come, let us listen with new ears. Do you hear it, that voice, so familiar yet still far? Less a longing and more a knowing, a whisper of something inside that seems to have known us longer than we've known it. Come, let us listen together. Please join with me in the words to our church covenant. Love is the spirit of this church and service its law. This is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Our candles represent the many milestones and transitions of joy and sorrow among us. For just a moment before I begin my message, let us take a deep breath and hold one another in our thoughts. Regardless of the outcome of the election, there will be work to do. And I imagine some of us may already be feeling far too overwhelmed to even think of adding yet one more thing to our already impossible schedules. Maybe we're just setting our sights on the election and can't think beyond that right now. Tuesday, the Birmingham Church released a video that some members have been working on for about 5 years. It's called Bending the Arc, the Vote. And it recalls some history, especially of Birmingham Unitarian Universalists in the movement resulting in the 1965 Voter Rights Act, or the events that led up to that signing. Leading into this election, we have seen many examples already of an erosion of that act, as incidences of voter suppression, just as in the past, are evident to those willing to see. The film, which was part of a 6-part series, reminded me of research and stories that I listened to and collected in 1995 for what turned out to be a major project toward my Master of Divinity at Meadville Lombard. The stories of our Southern UUs in a time that was not so politically different from now, although, of course, the pandemic adds a huge layer of stress, anxiety, and difficulty. But their stories are a reminder of the courage and commitment that is a part of our larger UU story. If you've been watching our Sunday services, you've noticed we've been following a theme based on a book by Dr. Wendy Farley, Beguiled by Beauty, A Life of Contemplation and Compassion. Mary Lee, Laura, and I have taken advantage of resources through membership in the Worship Design Studio. It's available to Unitarian Universalist clergy as well as clergy from any other denomination. And it's helping supplement some of our ideas with their creativity in hopes of providing meaningful Sunday services during this very unusual time in our lives. All of us need a little help as we continually adapt to this changing and evolving situation. There were a few reasons that I was drawn particularly to this series. One is that For the Beauty of the Earth is part of the series, and the song is used in each one of the sessions. For the Beauty of the Earth has always, I think, been my all-time favorite of our hymns. It takes me back to a beautiful flower communion service that was the Easter tradition in my UU church I grew up in San Diego. So the hymn transports me back to a wonderful special holiday celebrated with my family and church friends. As a child, my theology was forming through these associations with the people, the music, the activities, the words that I heard, the rituals, and the traditions I grew up with. Another reason I wanted to explore this series was Dr. Farley's premise that cultivating a life of contemplation and compassion leads to justice, since one of our principles is that we covenant to affirm and promote justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. When I'm reminded that compassion is necessary for justice, I realize I may have to work a little harder on contemplative practices to get to compassion at this particular time. If you watched the water communion video online, you may have noticed a quote from Dr. Farley written on the picture of the drops of water creating ever-increasing circles of ripples in the water. The quote reads, "The difficulty and crisis of the world is overwhelming. It is impossible to bear it without very deep resources." And then the question, are you ready for a deeper well inside? We hope that some of the elements of the services in our series, Beguiled by Beauty, will suggest ways to help each of us deepen our well. Since our neurobiology is different, you may be more tuned into visuals, music, or even the moments of silence. Others may find they are more drawn to the spoken words. Hopefully, there is something for everyone. As we approach this election, the barrage of advertising and posting seems to sap some of my compassion, making my well a little more shallow. And as we continue, I will need to replenish my resources. The title of the documentary, Bending the Arc, The Vote, is a reference to the phrase made popular by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., "The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice." There's certainty in Dr. King's claim, yet the phrase actually comes from a sermon given in 1853 by abolitionist minister Theodore Parker, who studied at Harvard Divinity School and became an influential transcendentalist and Unitarian minister. In that sermon, Parker said, "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the future by experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience. And from what I see, I am sure it bends toward justice." Parker does not claim certainty. As an abolitionist, though, we know that he was active in the effort to end slavery in the United States. He was working for justice, and as a Christian, he believed strongly enough or had faith enough to believe that his actions could make a difference. Then, as now, people were divided. The animosity and divisiveness led to a civil war, which ultimately ended slavery in America. What I'm not sure of is whether or not a lot of people realize that that really was not that long ago. In terms of how many generations it takes to help a family move from slavery to a comfortable life, that's not long at all. I think if people had a better grasp on that, they would understand why reparations make sense. The Civil War ended in 1865. The Voting Rights Act was signed in 1965. Even though the 15th Amendment, ratified in 1870, prohibited states from denying male citizens the right to vote. Notice male citizens, they were the only ones who had the right to vote back then. But it prohibited denying male citizens the right to vote based on race, color, or previous conditions of servitude, numerous discriminatory practices were used to prevent African Americans, particularly across the South, from exercising their right to vote. Poll taxes, guessing the number of jelly beans in a jar, having to pass tests, having to get to the location for voting were just some of the barriers to voting. It took from 1870 to 1965 to establish a law to end discrimination with regard to voting. Now, however, a new set of tactics, possibly less obvious to those who will not see, are keeping African American citizens and others from exercising their right to vote. Voter suppression continues to be an issue as we head into this critically important election. Once again, Unitarian Universalists are calling upon one another to honor our principles and show up on the side of love. In the midst of a pandemic and a climate of violence, from where does the courage and commitment come to fight the injustice? As I asked myself that question, I went back to the stories I've heard through the years from the families, especially the parents of my friends who were involved in activities to bring about the Voting Rights Acts of 1965, Voting Rights Act. Most especially the ones that led to the march from Selma to Montgomery in 1965. Now, I moved to Alabama in 1968, so the march was over and it was not even a part of the conversation among my group of friends. It wasn't until much later that I learned what my friends and their families had been through. After I married and moved to Tuscaloosa for 12 years, I came back to the area with my family and returned to the Birmingham church, this time as a mother with 2 young children that I wanted to raise in the UU church. The large religious education program that I remembered had dwindled to almost nothing, and after a year of lamenting the loss, I got involved with a few other parents and a plan to grow the program, to grow it for my children and their children and for all the children that I hoped would come. I began to study religious education in our context, which stressed the importance of helping children develop a UU identity, a sense of belonging to a beloved community with a history and a tradition of supporting particular values and principles. I came to understand that my own sense of history and identity came from those early relationships in the UU churches I attended as a child and in my youth. Values and principles supported also by my family. That is part of my deeper well. By the 1980s, when I returned to the Birmingham church that I attended as a youth and young adult, my old friends had mostly all moved away, but a lot of their parents were still there and still active in the church. So their parents became my friends at that point, and I began to hear some of the stories that I had not heard when I was younger. I realized later that it took some time to process the fear and the trauma before they were ready to talk about the things that had happened. When I began my studies to become a minister, my first course was a UU history course. I decided to write my final paper on the Unitarian Universalists in the struggle for justice. The more I learned, the more there was to learn about the history, and the paper grew into this huge project that was my master's thesis, which they call an integrative paper. Apparently that's what happened when Pam Powell started the video project that turned into the 6-session series, Bending the Arc. And her push to finish and premiere it last week was directly related to the vote coming up. As I watched Tuesday night, I saw again the familiar faces of people I knew or know, people who shared those same stories with me. In 1995, I began the paper like this. Although located in the stronghold of segregation, early members of the Unitarian Church, Birmingham, Alabama, at the risk of personal safety, answered the call to work for justice in the struggle for racial equality. Even though the decisions were not always unanimous and often resulted in the loss of members, the church people proceeded with passion and dedication to effect whatever change possible toward a more fair and integrated society. Women and men, as partners in leadership, worked side by side in the church and in the community to speak out for the values inherent in their liberal faith. It would be difficult to understand the bond that developed between the members and the resulting strength and commitment to their institution without an understanding of this early history that the members shared. I was noticing that with each passing year, the number of individuals who carried that memory were getting smaller. The number was getting smaller. To me, the courageous acts of those early members stand as a testimonial to the faith placed in the ideals of liberal religion. The history and lore of an institution serve as reminders of the tradition. As a religious educator at the time, I wanted our young people to have a sense of UU identity. It felt important to me to record this history and keep it alive for future generations. Like many of our Unitarian Universalist churches in the South, the Birmingham Church was founded in the early 1950s. In January of 1952, 19 people showed up at a hotel in response to an ad placed in the paper by Mary Eimer Hobart, the wife of Reverend Alfred Hobart, minister of Charleston, South Carolina Church. He was also the regional director of the American Unitarian Association. I'm pretty sure I've seen a picture of him on a bulletin board at UUCP. Dr. Joseph Volker, then Dean of the University of Alabama School of Dentistry and a member of the Unitarian Service Committee's medical missions to Europe following World War II, was elected to lead the group. And then not long after that, between 40 to 60 regular attendees met every Sunday in the city council chambers of the very affluent suburb Mountain Brook. The first mayor of Mountain Brook was a member of the church. I remember him being active well into his 90s, Dr. Charles Dukoski. The Reverend Alfred Walters Hobart came to serve the fellowship as minister in September of 1953. For any who still remember him, he is spoken of as our beloved Dr. Hobart. And while I never met Dr. Hobart, I know his son, Reverend Jim Hobart, very well, and he served congregations and also taught at Meadville Lombard, our theological school in Chicago. By 1954, the group had purchased 6 building lots in this magnificent wooded area on Cahaba Road in Mountain Brook. You may have seen that church. It was nestled between the zoo and the botanical gardens. John Fuller was hired to be the architect to design the church. 14 years later, John's son Mike and I would be friends in our youth group at the church that John designed. Prior to signing the contract, John told me he wanted to study up on Unitarians so he'd know what kind of church to design for them. And as he and his wife Peggy learned more, they decided to join the church. Both became highly involved and valued members, and Peggy played a huge role in many of the activities around civil rights in that day and was a role model for other members of the church. In a survey written by Reverend Alfred Hobart entitled The Unitarian Universalist Witness in the Southeast, 1950 to 1966, he reports on the first hint of controversy in the church. Hobart cites a 1965 article written by Reverend Ed Harris in the Unitarian Universalist Register Leader, which was the predecessor to our magazine, The World. He wrote, "When the congregation moved into its beautiful new building October 1958, it voted that the doors would always be open to all people. This was done at a time when Negroes and whites were forbidden by law to sit together." Forbidden by law to sit together in 1958. Again, historically, not very long ago. The church's action resulted in the loss of some members and prospective members, some of whom later returned. End of quote. As you can see, this was a determined group of people with a seemingly clear sense of mission. Birmingham's story fits within a larger story of Unitarian Universalism. And so next Sunday, I'd like to share some of the stories of fear and courage of those early members and of Unitarian Universalists from across the country who came to participate in activities leading directly to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Thank you for listening.
We are stronger than our pain. We are greater than our fear. We are made of each I am, and we choose where we stand. We don't you let no pain and fear than our pain. We don't you let no pain and anger greater than our fear. We honor your pain, made of each I. We choose where we stand. We stand for peace and justice, stand for peace. We can stand for creating, choose to stand for love. There is power in each I am. We choose where we stand.
Our congregation is supported solely by the generosity of members and friends, all the people who want to help us achieve the mission of this congregation. If you are one of those people, then I invite you to pay attention now to the information on how to text and give, as well as the address for the church if you prefer to write a check. Thank you for everything you do to help this congregation thrive. Our closing words from Reverend Scott Taylor of Soul Matters. As we leave this space, may the bonds we feel remain. May the words of this day continue to guide us and steady us as we make our way. May the silence we held for each other keep us tethered to that place of calm, to that opening in our hearts that allows the grace of the world to continuously flow in and speak. May it be so.